Oh, that's the game. They're showing the game.
Perfect.
Is that cool or what? There's nothing like it.
Hey, Chris. So who needs the better?
T36 makes that like that. D90 doesn't sound like that.
What do you think about that?
I just want to, they need to put it out on PS3.
Would you play as your own characters or as each other's characters?
Oh, I'd definitely play as Bob. I would not even play with, but no.
See what he was talking about?
That's awesome.
That game is going to be the best game out there.
There's a lot of console games out there that don't want to play that.
Wow.
PS3.
That's why you got to come over to the studio.
Done. Done. I was going to grab a drink.
You guys got to get over to the studio to see that thing.
Yeah. When are we going?
Well, you set it up. We'll pay for you and get you on over.
Where are you guys working? Where
Mesa, Arizona.
Mesa, Arizona?
Yeah.
Are you developing it for like the PS3 and the Xbox 360?
No, I don't think they're start out with that. They're doing the
PC release?
doing the PC release.
Welcome back to Dial the Gate, the Stargate Oral History Project. My name is David Reed. I cannot articulate the joy is not the right word, satisfaction is not the right word. Hence, I cannot articulate what it is to come back with this particular group of people for this particular episode. Katie Postma has returned, lead community manager of Stargate Worlds and my predecessor. But more importantly in this episode, Dan Elggren, who is the studio lead of Stargate Worlds, is with me for the first time since I think the last time that I saw you was the Midway. So it is a treat to have you here, sir. How are you?
I'm excellent. And yeah, it's Like I was telling you guys earlier, it's the memories and the fond memories I have of just seeing you two. It just warms my heart. So I'm just so good to be here.
I'm so thrilled that you agreed to sit down and talk. And it there's so many feelings that come from seeing you, Dan, and it's a treat to have you. I'm really curious as to what you have to say, especially looking back on this project at this point in your life, the 20-year anniversary of it getting rolling, as I believe this year. And everyone's probably at a very different place in their lives who worked on the project. But in addition to that, the thing that really stands out for me is the fact that you said in our correspondence, and Katie is here to also be a sounding board as well. She's going to co-host this with me, and she's feeling a little under the weather, just so we're getting that out there now. So she's not going to be as talkative as she was last time. Is that you said that this is the best team of people that you ever worked with. You said that to me privately. So if you don't want that getting out there to your other teams, let me know. If that's the case, there is a host of Stargate fandom out there that deserves to know why. And it's all the more reason that we sit down and we have these conversations about the title, about the people who were working on it, and about what it meant to everyone with you at the top of this juggernaut. What does Stargate Worlds mean to you after all this time?
I mean, when I talk about Stargate Worlds, one, it's on my wall, so I always sort of have it in reference, and this is a lot of my meetings and conversations I have,
Yeah.
and even interviews that I have in the past. And the reason I say Stargate Worlds is one of my favorite, times and hardest times, in my career is, you get those standard interview questions where they ask you that question, like, what's your favorite time or your favorite project? And it's always been Stargate Worlds. And it's at the root of it, it is the people, right? A lot of us were just early on in our career, and there's so many people this is their first game job. And, they've gone on to make amazing games and do some amazing things in the industry. And it's just amazing to watch them sort of grow. I watched Erin Ali at GDC give a talk just a couple years ago. And I'm just down there in the audience, just beaming, just like, she's just amazing. Just seeing what she's been able to accomplish. And so many others that I've just, that I have the few that I've been able to keep track of and keep in contact with. There's a little bit of that, we went to war together, right? And we came out of the trenches, and that bond, I think, is unbreakable because, we had to go through so many different fun times and hard times. And so, yeah, it will always be that, core memory for me of just an amazing part of my career.
What is the first video game that you fell in love with?
The first video game I ever fell in love with. I mean, that's going back to like my
I
college
assume you
days.
like them.
Oh yeah, no, it's I remember being in the computer lab, and then the first time somebody pulled up Warcraft, RTS in the lab as a LAN party. I'm like, wait, what is this? It's like that's interesting. I always wanted to go into games and just start off, but it wasn't a core trajectory for me to build games. But I was doing recruiting in Salt Lake City, Utah, and this game company that was just across the street said, "Hey, we're looking for QA testers. Come and play with, come and help us out." And testing on early games of field and stream hunting games and championship bass, and those were the early days of the game industry. I just I was the Bubba market, as we like to call it. So it was a lot of fun just starting off in the game industry, and it's no matter how rough the industry's been, and even these last few years, there's something about it and the people that you work with that just keeps drawing you back to it.
Man. So what year would that have been? What year was your first year getting involved in this?
So I started that first game company was back in '97.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, so I've been making games for 28, 29 years now. So it's just been this interesting sort of roller coaster. You get the console curves that come through and to completely disrupt the industry for a time period, and you got obviously what we hit in the recession and those types of things that were just pretty big dramatic shifts, but it's the end of the day, and it's about the people. It's the people that you work with and those connections that you make, and going through and shipping a game and We were close.
I'm John Hoskin for TenTonHammer.com. We're here at GCDC in Leipzig, Germany.
We're actually just doing the Friends and Family stress test right now, where we have a very few amount of people getting on the servers, making sure the servers are working. But very rapidly, we're actually going to be opening up the doors to a larger audience, where we're going to actually do gameplay testing, which is really going to focus on how does the game play, how does it feel, how does the community interact within these environments. So it's getting out there and really registering so we can get as many people into the game as possible. We actually kicked off our community website probably 2 years ago. Here we are, we're just barely starting to begin pre-production for this game, and that's one of the first things we did, is make sure that we actually opened up to the community. And we still have people that are still part of that community from the day one of that launch. With our community manager, the building up guilds and commands right from the get-go, that sort of gets this foundation outside of the game. And then once you get in the game, we wanted to really sort of embed people into some of the commands. We wanted to have smaller teams, which are sort of mini guilds that will allow people to, if you don't have 40 friends, we don't want to force you to try to find 40 friends, sort of thing. And that's where Katie Postma, our community manager, is really going to make that big difference in utilizing those areas.
And Katie will be thrilled that you mentioned her in the video.
I figured you would. I threw one out for her.
We had a game, and we're at that last 20% of that game. And I always say last 20% is 80% of the work, right? And that's what we're fighting with, is get that last 20% done, which is a lot of work. And that's when it hit us, that everything shifted. But that time is just precious.
Do you feel that it was 20% left? Like, we had gone through alpha, we'd gone through closed beta. I don't think we were yet in open beta, unless that was after my time. But I was there in closed beta because I was in the room with the guys, and they'd say, okay, add 10 more, add 20 more. So, I was like adding them in real time and DMing people to, hey, if you can get home from work, you can come in the beta this afternoon. I remember those days very well.
Yeah,
but to me, it felt like more than 80% at that point. I'm just wondering, why do you consider it still 20% unfinished? I mean, this is from, I was a noob at the time, obviously, but.
I mean, and that time when we're in that alpha and going to potentially that beta, and I was literally just watching a video of sitting in the back of the Humvee at Leipzig and talking about starting the alpha, right? And we were starting to bring on people, a lot of friends and family, and that's when Demetrius and the engineering team were really taking what we built with the BigWorld, about Backend and Unreal, and something that had never really been done before, right? And being able to start proving that this technology works, and really show off how this game could perform at these higher levels. And I think that the game was there in all those different pieces. And the reason I say it's like 20% is because you start getting into that point where you really start bringing on people into that type of scale. It's not just the server or the monitoring of being able to get that. It's the little details, right? Of just that little shift of how that player interacts, or that little animation. And those little details is, I think, really that last bit of polish that really puts the game over the edge to really make a difference.
That you don't see until you see hundreds of people playing, right? Because the team can play it all day long, but we're so used to it. It's not until you have those hundreds, that critical mass of people seeing it. Yeah, that's true.
And then there's definitely something to be said that I wish we would have done more to push the game out faster, in the essence of getting it into more users' hands faster, right? Because hindsight's 2020, right? Because we didn't really know that the game was going to hit those hard times, and if we would have known that we were going to hit this wall of these hard times, I think if we would have gotten that game out there and maybe into some type of subscription base, I think we would have had a different story to tell. With more people on it, and maybe even some paying customers on it, and we were just 2 steps away from that.
How do you go from getting involved in the QA side of things in the late 90s to studio lead? What transformation occurred for you in a pretty compressed period of time, all things considered? What was that journey like for you over those next 9-10 years? What happened?
Yeah, I mean, I got sucked into the game industry, right? And also young family moving, so I started in Salt Lake, and, I went and joined this small company. You might have heard of Westwood Studios in, Las Vegas.
That
Yeah.
tiny thing.
A little tiny company and first MMO, building Earth and Beyond, right? And working with that amazing team at Westwood and working on Command and Conquer, like these RTS, and then Westwood going through its own closures and moving us all out to LA and going from LA where I was there. I don't know if you guys know EA Spouse days of and all the letters that came from that. I was there, in that environment, and EA Spouse came out from that studio working there.
Oh,
And
I
it's
didn't realize you were there. Wow. That was a big deal.
Yeah, and it was, a lot of weekends and a lot of, hard hours trying to, work on some amazing games like Medal of Honor is another sort of great franchise, and working as a production leader on sort of some of those products. And it's funny because I got to this point, I told my wife, I'm like, I can't do this commute anymore. I was driving all the way from like northern LA all the way down. On a good day, it was 45 minutes each way. On average, it was 2 to 3 hours of commuting. And, I wouldn't see my kids all week type of thing. And I was like, I'm done. And I think the very next day I was on that commute, a recruiter called me and said, hey, there's this company called Cheyenne Mountain Entertainment in Arizona.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, yes, please hook me up. And please,
But
anything
you
you
knew,
do.
but you knew Chris from
Yeah,
Earth
so
and Beyond.
yeah.
So
So Chris called.
did he give your name to the recruiter? Like, wasn't he? I thought so. Okay. That makes
Yeah.
perfect sense.
So I think I
He'd
had
be
like
dumb not to.
Yeah, no, I had like 2 or 3 phone calls with Chris and a couple like Joe and a couple others. They hired me over the phone. I never flew out to Arizona once. I had family here too, so it was to me as like, yes, you offer the job, yes, I'm signed up. And so
Oh,
I took the job over the phone, and then within a 2 week time period, I was already in Arizona working. And unfortunately, I left my wife, and she still holds that against me a little bit to pack up the house, but she
you
did
left her temporarily, not
temporarily.
forever.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you for clarifying that.
'Cause I'm like, I'm pretty sure I've met her several times since
Yes,
then.
I've done that maybe to her. I think I did that to her a couple times, but
Yeah.
she's still with me and still puts up with me, which I'm very grateful for.
Aw.
Hey,
I
the bills
remember
don't pay
how
themselves.
I
Yeah.
remember how excited Chris was when he told us you were joining. He was so excited. Like it was there were a few moments, but that was because I was there early days, which we've talked about before, but there were a few things that happened and fell into place, and it kept feeling like, oh, this is real, this is happening, and that was a giant leap forward for everyone there when you joined.
Well, I think I was employee like 10 or 11. It
Yeah.
was still really early, still really small, and that
Yeah.
we weren't even in that main office yet. Because I remember showing up
That's
there,
right.
and we were in this cramped little space, and everybody was trying to figure out how to get any type of asset into BigWorld.
Yes.
Right? Because
Can
BigWorld
you
was
explain
so
Big
those
World
guys
real quick
too.
to the layman's in the room?
Oh, BigWorld guys are great.
They're
What is
great.
that? Is it a tool? What is it?
It was the Unreal of the days, but it was Unreal in the essence of it was a MMO Unreal. So they
Okay.
were, their tool was allowing us to, we wanted to build an MMO, and that was the tool of the day. Uh, but their back end was great, and that's exactly what we wanted to utilize. Their front end is what we struggled with. Our artists and designers just couldn't get anything through their pipeline to get any assets in the game. And so that was a big shift on sort of how we went from, okay, how do we unlock our artists and designers to be able to start being able to create this game, but keep all the amazing stuff that we had for the back end, because Unreal had no back end, right? There's nothing we could do to sort of go to the scale we wanted with the back end. So it was that shift of going from, all right, how do we get these two to marry and talk to each other? And that's where Demetrius and that team was able to sort of like, all right, well, let's take out the back end of Unreal and put in this BigWorld back end. And that's, again, I think some of the early images that you saw of the game were us just now unlocking the team and building in Unreal, and they were just able to just turn on the lights and really start moving.
How familiar with you with Stargate before moving to Arizona?
So I showed up, and Joe, of course, he's like, okay, you need to watch all these shows. I'm like, done.
And he hands you the DVD set. I know, it's so funny.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
like I appreciate that, but I've already watched all of them. So
Wow.
I was already a fan, and I've already seen all the shows, and so
Wow.
it's like even before it showed up. So that was like another plus, right? It's like, oh, cool. Like not only do I get out of LA and I get to go work with some fun people that I already knew, and I get to work on a franchise that I already love. So it was like, cool, win. Like yes,
Wow.
let's go.
Oh, that's great.
Any favorite character or episode?
Oof. There's so many. It's
I know. There's only 354 of them now.
yeah. There's it's
And
like
about to
how
be
do you
more.
sort of pick your favorite child? As I was watching, some of the recaps of, I was watching Christopher Judge and like Avatar, where they were going back. Is Avatar where he goes and he's playing the game of like the original SG-1 shooter and that type of stuff, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah, they used the footage from the Alliance. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I thought that was good, and
Yeah.
and it's Richard Dean Anderson has just always been such a great character in that, and he's just was able to really I think bring a lot of that show to life because of just that personality. So it's like
Absolutely.
Avatar is probably like the one that probably stick out the most.
Yeah.
But it's like some of those early days of the
You like SG-1 ahead of
yeah
the
SG-1 Atlantis was fun. It was something different. It was fun meeting all those show creators and people at the Comic-Con.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like SG-1 is always just the true. But even going all the way back to the movie, like the original movie was just amazing to me.
Nothing
That's
like
what
it.
started it, right?
Yeah.
That gate lends itself to the perfect MMO space because you can go. I mean, you don't need a Hearthstone per se. You just need a gate and your ability to access it. And there's just so much potential in that. I remember seeing the original logo, which I think is so simple but so perfect at the same time, of Stargate Worlds. It's just the logo. It's just the name of the game and that horizon line. You don't need more complicated than that. It says
the event
potential. Horizon. It's the curvature of a planet. It's like this is all that you need because beyond this there be dragons. Beyond this is adventure. I do want to establish fairly quickly here the enormity of what this was. So excluding marketing costs, Dan, if you can correct me where I'm wrong. In the middle 2000s, a AAA title could cost between 10 and 30 million to develop and ship. We're not talking about marketing. In 2004, WoW cost approximately 63 million to ship vanilla, the original version. I have been told that Stargate Worlds would have taken approximately 21 million to ship before marketing costs. Does that sound right?
It does. An interesting story of, I don't know if we're jumping ahead, but the reason that 20 million sort of sticks out to me, and this might just be hearsay, because at the end we were talking to a lot of potential partners, and Sony being one of those, of like how do we to continue to sort of build this out. And Sony, one of their offers, I found out after the fact, was around that 20 million mark type of thing.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
And my reason for hearsay is because my understanding was that we had that offer, but the owners of the company decided to turn that down.
Well, because I think it's okay to say this, they saw the potential in self-publishing and creating a publishing arm, which was FireSky at the time.
Hence FireSky.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that was part of their motivations to not go with a third party.
And the biggest return, right, is for us as an individual studio and be able to have that sort of autonomy and there's definitely a lot of value in that, right? It's of course, again, hindsight, you're like, oh man, we missed out on an opportunity to sort of get funding and that type of thing, but when you're in the heat of the battle, it's you want to be able to sort of have the ability to take what you guys we're also passionate about and be able to ship, right, and be able to have that autonomy. And you add another third party publisher in there with a contract that dictates what you are supposed to do and not do. It makes a big difference on what your flexibility is.
For sure. And it could have potentially like depending on when they were wanting to get involved, it could have made it more expensive too. It's like, well, if this is, I'm not sure when along the line this offer would have been, but it's like if they want certain changes, it's going to cost more money. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. It's just not, it's a gradual progression of downs. You don't just throw it all the way to the end zone on the other side. So it's a complicated piece of machinery. At the time, I don't remember who told me this, if it was Chris Klug or someone, it may have been you, Dan. It's like, at that point in 2007, there was no more complicated piece of software in any kind of similar space than an MMO. I mean, there were only three of these things to exist. It was just so unwieldy.
Back in that day. Yeah. No, and the interesting, I think the reason Sony was so interested in us is because we sort of cracked that nut of the BigWorld and Unreal connection, and to be able to have a MMO using Unreal at that scale was unheard of. And so no wonder they were so excited to sort of partner with us, because I'm pretty sure at that point in time they were trying to do the same thing but hadn't been able to sort of crack that nut.
I see. Okay. And then bringing you guys in would have then given them, potentially the secret sauce and to be able to create more of that kind of content. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Which I think, like you talk about the ball game, they were looking 3-4 plays ahead. And as Dan pointed out, if we could have just gotten that first down, we would have been able to go a lot farther, right? But they were looking ahead, like we talked about with Nick last time. They had started not one but two other potential, game studios. Same studio, but for other games, right? That we were starting to go visit and see what they were doing, right?
We were starting to shop around and, to sort of try to find, potential, investors / partners that can really sort of help us through that, especially that hard time in 2007, 2008 type of thing. So because up at that point, Stargate was fully funded through angel investors. It's
wow.
So it's like, you guys remember, like we had investors walking through that building all the time. Ty Detmer, or you name ex football player, whoever they could get their hands on to come in through. Come to find out, my wife's uncle was an investor. I'm like. And it just, I had no clue that he was investing in the studio. And it wasn't like a lot of money for each investor. They were just small implants into the studio and getting us sort of the money we needed to continue on. And that's when the recession hit, all those investments dried up. And then that's where everything is like, we just had no money.
So you're employee number 10 in that neighborhood. What was involved for you on the day-to-day when you're just getting rolling here? You're building an enormous Goliath of something that's only been done successfully a handful of times before. You're asked to shepherd this thing to completion. What do you? I'm tongue-tied just sitting here, like putting down a bullet point list of what happens next. What do you do, Dan? Can you take us through the process? What does your day look like at this point early on?
Well, we talked about it a little bit already. It's like, just the sheer fact that we had no pipelines. That was the first step, is how do we unlock the small team that we already had to start being able to create assets for the game? And that was, so knowing that we had a huge technical battle ahead of us, we had to start building out, because I think for a period of time, we had, some artists and some designers that were building out these amazing concepts, all paper designs, and building out these assets and, just trying to sort of figure it out, but we had no way to get them into the game. Some of those early prototypes that we had just using BigWorld, it would take us weeks upon weeks just to get simple assets, just to go from, initial 3D Studio Max, I think it was, into the game. And that type of, pipeline it'll kill you. You can't do that. So those were the first steps, right? Is like, how do we get asset development unlocked? And so once we sort of made that call, I was like, all right. And that was a lot of negotiations with Unreal and, figuring out what the license would be, and also trying not to burn the bridge with BigWorld, because, we were talking about, ripping their back end out. And so after we went through all those negotiations, and when we were able to start unlocking the team and using Unreal, that's when we could start growing. And that's where a lot of our assets and developers that we were able to bring in, a little animation team in, and our Howard, was able to come into that point and really start making a huge difference on sort of what the art team was going to look like. And Austin comes in, and the design. Chris was really to open up the design team. It's like all those things just started unlocking. And then from there, it's just we started figuring out, all right, now that we can unlock the developers, and we sort of have, the good thing is Chris was already always building the game. He already had the core concept of what it was, and now we just needed to sort of build out those pipelines.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, now we have a flow, and you guys remember the studio, right? Every wall was covered with pipelines.
Every wall.
Yep.
We had Gantt charts and images of everything, and it's like we'd stand in front of the sticky notes, and we'd fight with the super sticky notes versus the non-sticky notes, just trying to keep them up on the wall, and just trying to keep things just organized, because we didn't have a good software tool set for project management. It was all Excel spreadsheets, and Rebecca and Erin just wrangling every single piece of that game to put it up on the wall. And it's funny thing is, like, those are some of my fond memories, is sitting in front of that wall talking about all those different with
A's
the
and
team.
O's.
And just
A's
I had
and
my
O's.
little stamp,
That's
and I'd
right,
stamp
A's and
things,
O's.
and it was just good times with the team, because we'd all come together and we'd all sort of work as a tandem to sort of build on the same thing. So it was a lot of fun. But yeah, that those are the early days of figuring out the pipelines. And then once we had that, and the team started growing pretty rapidly. I think, what was the total size? It was like 70, or
78?
just our team.
Yeah, I thought there was an 8 at the end, so it could have been 68.
Yeah, so it's right around that 70-ish number. So
we didn't exceed 100. Interesting. Not the Stargate Worlds team didn't.
The Stargate Worlds team did not. Right? You add all the FireSky folks and HR and marketing. That's where that exceeds a lot of that. And then the FireSky was really starting to grow towards the end there.
Right.
But yeah, we were small, and we did a lot, which was amazing. To what we're able to sort of build with just that small team.
Okay. I want to talk about the people that you really leaned on a lot on the day-to-day to get things done. I was talking with a couple of other folks, one other person in particular who called out Rebecca Orozco and Erin Ollie. He went to a subsequent project, and he found like their equivalents to be lacking in terms of him being able to lean on them and get things done. Like, who were these two? What was their function? What did they do? And how did they make your life easier?
What didn't they do?
Exactly? What did
I don't even know what their titles are.
Yeah, I mean, they're producers, and this was their first gig in the game industry. I remember Erin coming in for her interview, and she had a little, 3-ring binder where she had organized all these different things, and she was going through all of her different organization pieces, and like just top notch, even before she walked in the door. And it was just a no-brainer to hire her, and then bringing in Rebecca, and those two were just a dynamic duo. I think, if you think about that, a team even that size, and the skill of a project that size, you had two brand new, fresh producers, and myself, trying to wrangle that, and a lot of that fell on them, right? Because they were, I think one had like all the creative art, and the other one had all the engineering, and they were able to manage all those different pieces day to day, and ensuring that things were flowing, managing fires that were coming up on a regular basis. And I've had the pleasure of working with both Erin and Rebecca, at Blizzard and other places. And yeah, it's amazing. They would blow people out of the water every single place that they went. And they're just amazing developers.
Yeah, they are. I just remember the day to day, and I, as was remote. So I was there a week a month, or 1 week every 6 weeks, or whatever it was at the time. And coming in, they were my touch points, right? Because they kind of had their finger on the pulse of everything. But that didn't just include the work. That included everything personal that was going on with anybody. If anybody was having a bad day, if anybody was sick, if anybody had just had a baby or a new dog or anything, the two of them knew. They had to know the full game. They had to know all the work. They had to know what each other was doing. And then they also had to know what every single person was doing around them at all times, both at work and at home. And so I just remember going to them with anything, hey, why is why is this not working out? Like, why is this person reluctant to do this work at this point? Oh, well, and then they'd explain everything that had been going on, you know, politically or personally or professionally. It was crazy, but they were incredible.
And it's not only were they just really good at just knowing everything that was going on, but they were also just the morale builders too. Like, you know, Erin bringing in, I can't remember what's the name of the game where she had the helmet, and it was like her favorite game of all time. And she'd come to stand up with the helmet on, and it just, you know, just bring everybody to just to tears, just rolling in laughter, you know, just, you know, as we go through some of those difficult times and just difficult decisions. We're always just a light in the room. So yeah, I give them so much credit for just being so amazing.
I just remember her with a mustache. That's all. I don't know what the mustache was from. I just remember her in a mustache. And it's like, this just brings a smile to my face.
Sounds like Erin, yeah.
So we're looking to get character creation at first playable, which what you guys are seeing right now isn't there yet, but that's what we're going for. We're looking for suppression working in game, minigame call-in system, mob alignment, which we've been working on currently, first functional pets, vendors, getting the Stargate and the ring transporters functioning, mission giver icons, and cooldown UI in game.
They were the heart. They were the heart of the office for sure.
Yeah, no, I can't say enough good things about them. And just, you know, I've had obviously those few touch points. Every now and then I'll meet up with Erin at GDC, and, you know, and I'm sitting on the blanket that I got for hiring Rebecca at Blizzard, because that was the bonus I got for being the hiring manager for hiring Rebecca next week. It's like amazing. I got my Blizzard blanket from Rebecca, but it's just I just knew that no matter where they go, they would just, you know, just blow it away. And they have. I think they've had both amazing careers.
I remember.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Katie.
I just want to do a tiny point, which is so many people from. I mean, Joe used to brag that I was the guild leader of a guild, and WoW, and we played forever and ever. I mean, I've been leading a guild for 23 years now. And, but because everyone from Stargate Worlds everyone who played WoW was in that guild, then as we left Stargate Worlds and went to other places, including Blizzard, they were still in our guild. So I had to like tell my officers, you know, nothing to see. There might be the occasional Blizz employee in here, just, you know, just act cool, guys. So that was fun. We got to keep playing with them after they were back at Blizz. That was a good time.
Yeah.
I loved Kilrog. I remember that server. It's like I'm still my original character's still in. Is Kilrog? I guess it's probably still around.
Yeah, it's still around. You're probably still in the guild. We moved the guild to we didn't move the guild, but we recreated the guild on a more populated server. But we still have the Kilrog guild. That's still the original.
Wow. Yeah. Dan, were you responsible for bringing Howard Lyon in?
Yeah, I convinced him to give up his regular painting job. Because he'd always tell me, I just want to paint, man. I just want to go paint. And I think I took him out to lunch a couple of times because I think I got him through like some type of friend or network, and I was able to finally convince him, like, dude, you would be amazing at this, and you can come build this video game with us. And I mean, you guys are going to talk to him at some point, and he's still awesome. He's still just everything about him just breeds creativity, right? It's just going to lunch with him on a regular basis, he'd look over at the route, in the parking lot. He's like, look at that texture, and look at how the tendrils move, and I'm like, dude, that is just amazing how creative that brain is, and just everything about him.
His whole family, Speaking of tendrils, they're all incredible. Yeah,
like Shari and everybody else. It's like I saw Shari just a couple weeks ago at a museum.
Oh, good.
And we were just talking about just some of those good old days, and it's just every single one of them. It's
the best.
Just the best. Just really good, down to earth people that I just.
And always teaching and always reaching out and just being active, and helping support other creatives and young people. And I just love them so much.
Oh, my daughter, she's in the art program at the local high school. And she comes home the other day and she's like, yeah, my teacher spent the entire day talking about Howard Lyon. Because he now lives here, he's just a few blocks from me, but it's like they spent the whole day talking about Howard and his art and everything he does, and I'm like, it's such a small world, and what they've been able to accomplish in the art world.
Yeah. Every time I turned around, I would be encountering it. I went out to when the big buildings in the LDS church, that the one that was put into Gilbert in 2000. What are they called? They're not the wards; they're the bigger ones.
The temples.
The temples. And I got to go into it before it was while they were still doing tours with a friend of mine, and I walked through this place and I was like, I bet Howard's fingers have been on these walls at some point. I didn't find out before, but I found out afterward. I reached out to him and I said, did you have any hand in that? He said, did you see the paintings in the baptismal areas? I'm like, yes. He said, that was me. I was like, man, of course, and it's just, he's so good. He is a fine artist. And it's just the fact that we got him for this thing was such a coup. The Agnos painting is in my den. And I mean, I think it's one of the better interpretations of the Lantian architecture from the ancient era that exist. So that was Howard, and I can't wait to have him on. I mean, it's going to take forever to unspool all this stuff with him, but he's just a powerhouse. You can't get in his way.
I'm excited.
Right.
It's like I can't wait for that episode. It's like he's just such a good dude. And I've finally just been able to reconnect with him over the last a couple weeks, and he's always just been a positive influence in my life, and it was such a blessing having him during that time period, because he was that creative visual sort of leader for the game, and all the style and visual sort of direction came from him. And it's amazing to me, like, how few art directors can do what he did in leading the creative vision the way that he did. And it's like, you don't realize it when unless you have somebody like Howard that can really drive the creative vision like he did.
But he didn't come from video gaming, correct? He came from tabletop.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's done a lot of book covers, and he's done a lot of Magic cards?
Magic the Gathering cards.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and I think in Diablo, I think Diablo 3 or 4, he did most of those icons. He was doing. So he's sort of dabbled in that sort of side of things, but at the end of the day, if you ask him, and I'm sure he'll sort of back this up, is he just loves to paint, and that's his happy place, and that's ultimately that's what he was able to go back and do, and sort of continue his career doing that, and he's just continued to make an awesome impact on that in so many different lives.
Who else do we need to call out at this junction? I know there's a list, but we haven't talked about engineering too terribly much. Who was really critical on that back end there, the infrastructure, to making sure the scaffolding to this thing was strong?
Well, I mean, Demetrius.
Demetrius Combs.
He helped, and he organized, put together an amazing team that was able to sort of have all these different strengths of pulling these things together.
Mark and Conan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one unique thing about Demetrius is, which he'll always say, is he's colorblind. And that's one of the things that we spent a lot of time doing, is, and Howard took that to heart, is how do we ensure that we have this game to support colorblind individuals? And so we, a lot of our UI and a lot of our sort of systems were built around that. And Demetrius was our test case for all of our colorblind implementation. But
that's accessibility, achieving before that was a thing, and now it's everywhere. That's pretty great.
Yeah, but no, Demetrius, he definitely led all, the entire technical infrastructure, and he, we talk about, that BigWorld Unreal integration like it was nothing, and the reason I think we felt like it was nothing is because Demetrius, just the way that he would dissect that and then communicate how we were going to do it, he did that in such a organized fashion that it allowed us to have that confidence that we could do that. I mean, here we said Sony couldn't do it, right? Sony was struggling to find a way to have these larger backend infrastructures, and our little team in Arizona was able to pull that all together, and that the technical sort of depth of that team was able to do it.
So where did that end up? Sorry, David, did that end up going other places after that? Like, did that kind of edify any other teams, or was that able to be leveraged anywhere else?
That's a good question. Okay.
I mean, that might be, I don't know if you're able to get Demetrius on or whatnot, but I do think that once the team sort of broke apart. I mean, obviously there's Stargate Resistance and the stuff that they were able to do with that, but that didn't really take into consideration anything that we did with Big World. Like that was just unreal and sort of. So I think that when they pulled the plugs on the servers, they lost all that capability.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to build my understanding here. So Big World and Unreal were integrated with one another. So you got these things to play along with each other in order to make the back end of Stargate Worlds work. It wasn't trading one out for the other.
Yeah, it was literally ripping out whatever sort of limitation of a back end that was on Unreal and
Okay.
integrating all the Big World sort of capabilities. Because again,
Okay.
Big World was a very capable back end system, but it just lacked any type of front end. And everybody knew
Okay.
that, right? And so that's what we were able to do and make it into a product that was as close as it was with
But
Stargate World.
there also had to be, licensing deals struck with all of that as well,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like you had to have, you had to have separate agreements to be able to even do that stuff,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Because you're buying it kind of out of a box, and you're,
Mhm.
like you say, if you're integrating something else into it, then all of a sudden your service agreements, all that changes. So yeah,
Because I mean, the way that you're spot on, right, is like the way that that sort of licensing works is, because we were licensing Unreal, and what you could do is every version you can upgrade your game to the latest version, and you
Right.
can continue to do that. But at some point in time, if you wanted source code, that's a little chunk of change, right, that you
sure.
needed to sort of pull out. And that was a big commitment for a small little team to sort of buy the source code and then also
And then the
not be able
upgrades
to.
don't work.
Yeah,
You have to
exactly.
make them work every time. Wow.
Yeah, if you do want to pull any of the latest technology that's coming from Unreal, it's like either you like say, oh well, can't do it, or you took a lot of time to upgrade yourself.
I think that
Wow.
this is a great point in this conversation to bring this up. There are a number of people who are going to ask, well, if someone had the cash and the wherewithal to bring this thing to its 20% home stretch and get this thing out there, why isn't it done? And it's lacking the fact that this was built on Unreal 3 and that technology is a product of its time, and you can't just bring it into Unreal 5. Can you please
No,
illustrate that for us?
you wouldn't want to either. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I think what you're saying is that every little bit of feature set that you have in there, how lighting's done, how things are drawn, and it's not it takes a lot of time. You look at Blizzard; they took a lot of their old games now, like the old Warcraft games and their old Diablo games, and they've sort of modernized them. That wasn't like, oh, I took all these assets and just upres them and I threw them in an engine type of thing. It's like it's a full development team building those games almost anew because that technology shifts so dramatically, especially
That's
back in
right.
those days. The technology of those editors in Unreal and Unity and all those things shifts so fast that you're getting updates, every couple weeks, and you either choose to take them or you don't. And you have to understand that every single time you take an update, it has an impact to your velocity as a team. So at some point in time, you got to rip that band-aid off and only focus on just your game and understand that you're not going to see the latest new technology and just try to get the game out the door. And like you're saying, is David is like at some point in time, it's like you can't just reignite that and then throw new assets into Unreal 5 and all of a sudden that just works. It's no, there's a lot of deep integration that you have to go through just to get that thing up and running again.
That's it.
I
And
mean,
as things get unrolled to you guys, you can assimilate a new piece of Unreal into the system architecture, and I'm guessing that it would introduce bugs that you would have to account for and then chase around and pin down and fix.
Yeah, it took some time, and some of those, the longer that we waited to get updates, the harder it would be to sort of integrate. And there were definitely times where we are just like, okay, no, it's like we'd have to look almost feature by feature of
yeah.
exactly what they were offering and decide it's like, oh, is that worth it? Oh no. And then the next one comes, oh, is it worth it? Oh crap. Yeah, that one is worth it.
And knowing it's the farther away you get from having updated, the more trouble you're going to have. Like if you go from point 1 to point 6, there could be incremental changes in 2 to 5 that sort of hamper your you have to go back and kind of fix those too. I mean, the
Yeah.
elements we're talking about, David, like how far graphics have come, how far sound and music, you know,
Oh my God.
have
Yeah.
come. Like
Generations.
we're back to having 10% done on the game when you think about us having the score and the concept and the story, which isn't nothing, but everything else, I think you'd have to start and rebuild from scratch. It'd be fun.
Yeah,
You want to do that,
it's-
Dan?
Oh yeah.
I think we'd all be pretty excited to work on it again because it can, you know, finally getting a Stargate game to actually ship that's good. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, that would be pretty fun.
Absolutely. No, there's so much that goes into something this large, and it's not just the right people to bring on to pull it off. It's also recognizing truly what the IP is, what it's known for, what it wants to be, and to make sure that you're going to have a tone that's going to A, reflect, but B, to honor, do honor to that which has already, people have already fallen in love with. How critical was Chris to pulling that off? And how much did you work with Chris Klug on the week to week to shape that vision into creating something that was Stargate?
Yeah, I mean, Chris and that team had a very strong vision of what it was, and as well as they had the depth in that team to be able to pull off all the different subsystems, you know, the Brian Hines and all the different, you know, individual sort of contributors that you had within the design team. Like they all owned a piece of that puzzle, and they were all very capable of sort of managing that. Right? You know, for us, you know, it was more, you know, for me, especially was, you know, hold on, right? You know, how, and then also, how do we keep them from doing everything, right? Because they wanted to do everything, right? And we, at some point in time, you just gotta like, all right, we sort of need to rein this thing back in so we can actually ship this thing at some point, because their ideas were endless, right?
The feature creep.
Yeah, and you also got to realize that at this point in time, MMOs were an established, you know, genre, right? And there was an expectation, especially when you had a game like World of Warcraft that was just this huge behemoth that was just bringing in money hand over fist. And the expectation that you felt as a developer, as an MMO, is that you need to sort of match what they've already done. And like you're saying, like here we are, you've got what is it, 60 millimeter plus that just to get the vanilla WoW out, and we're trying to do
The original
that.
version.
Yeah, and we're just trying to do that on a budget, and that, you know, WoW had years of development and live services, and now we're like, oh, even though vanilla WoW was this, it's now, you know, this that we're trying to sort of feed the beast to sort of compete with in some fashion. And you know, there's definitely, we could have pulled it back, right? I don't think we needed to think that we needed to compete at that level. And we should have just said, all right, no, here's the base minimum of our expectations of what this game will be, and
Let's
let's
be
build it.
EQ. Yeah.
Yeah, or be Eve, right? You know, Eve just
Yeah.
starts off small, right? And
Yeah.
built that community over time to sort of to this behemoth that it was, right? But
Oh, I
it
did not
started
know that
small.
about EVE Online. Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
Eve
yeah.
started really small.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was great, but yeah. Yeah, that's a really good example actually, and it is in space, which is also appropriate, but so it's such a different thing, and Stargate Worlds, we didn't just want to be WoW set in the Stargate IP, right? In the Stargate verse. So
Yeah.
yeah, again, hindsight, but I agree we should have just based what we wanted to do on what we could achieve and with whom and how many community members we had at the time, and gone
Yeah.
from there. I agree.
Even
we
starting
had
off
a
small.
good chunk.
Yeah. I mean, even getting like 10 to 100,000 people in the game and playing it, and just getting that feedback, and you know, like that would shape the decisions that we would make versus us trying to assume what the decisions we would make. And it's not like we had bad decisions, or I think we're making the wrong choices with that. You know, at the time, it's like they're all really good decisions, but you know, but you're right. It's like hindsight, we should
Did
have
you
just gotten it out faster.
Was Stargate Worlds the first non-original IP you worked on? Existing
No, so
IP.
I worked on Earth and Beyond. So that was my
Is
first
that based
MMO.
on a show?
No, original. That was out of Westwood.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, was Stargate Worlds the first
Oh,
non-original IP?
Did
I
something
mean,
previously exist before it that
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
adapting to?
yeah.
yeah, it's yeah. I don't. Yeah, I mean, having that sort of history of Stargate as well, I think also had a little bit of a weight to us, right? Because it's we wanted to make sure we were hitting, the fans,
Mm.
satisfaction to make
Yeah,
sure that we were, meeting what they would expect out of a Stargate game. And I think that's all
yeah.
that is hard with an IP like that,
There is
versus
that.
like you're saying, like an original IP like Earth and Beyond is like nobody really has any sort of preset, idea of what that game should be type of thing.
Right, right. I mean, there's that. There's the fan service. There's the service to the board at MGM, right? Those guys,
Yeah.
sitting around a table thinking who know nothing about games, nothing.
Yeah.
Maybe their kids do, but
And that annoying fan in the room who's saying that the Asgard shouldn't be dancing. Can I just spill the beans, Dan? Can I spill the beans? That was the two of us. That was me and Dan. And I'll never forget Dan looking at me and saying, the Asgard will dance. I'm like, and to this day, I'm like, you know what? Yeah, the Asgard should have danced. Would I have been happy about it? No. But the Asgard would have danced. I think ideally, like, part of me was it had the mindset of, we should have put like a little cheat code in there or something to unlock the Asgard dancing,
like an Easter egg, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that we didn't do it, the fans did it, or have a couple of servers where they didn't, because apparently there are WoW servers where you have to speak like in the
role playing. Yeah.
Right. So you can go in there and role play and I remember standing on that particular hill, just taking the arrows and thinking to myself, boy, oh boy, what have you come to?
I think it's a metaphor. I don't think Dan, I'm sorry to speak for you, Dan. I can imagine Dan not caring whether or not they danced, but just wanting the meeting to be done and us to all get on with our lives and developing the game.
That's right.
At some point, you're just like, we're done here,
it was interesting. There was a time I remember because I sat in that little corner in the design room, and I was sitting there at my desk, and sometimes I'd be sitting there and I'd hear somebody like so and so Dan said da 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 Dan said, and I'm like, I have no, I don't recall saying any of that.
Yeah.
But it is like they just use me as like to sort of get their point across. I'm like, wait, no, that's not the way it works.
Well, you taught me. This is the point in the show where we get a little bit more emotional or sensitive. You taught me, you made me grow up a little bit faster, and I thank you for that. I held a meeting where I brought in all of the principal folks, and Howard, Chris, you, and time is money. And I was trying to get some content going for the community side of things, as one does in the community management position. And Howard said, you may not even remember this, Dan, you may. Howard said, Stargate recipes. And I said, no, next. And Dan didn't let me get away with it. Dan said, hold on just a second.
No bad ideas.
You're not going to, you just dismissed it? Like, come on. And I've been thinking to myself, yeah, I just dismissed Howard Lyon's idea. What I should have done was, that's a good idea, Howard. Let's put that on the board. Thinking to myself, I'm just going to set this one aside. It may come to something, but right now I don't think it. And he was a big enough guy to call me out on it in front of everybody and say, no, come on. We don't need to go there. And my boss made Dan apologize to me later on. To this day, that was, in my opinion, unnecessary, because he taught me something that I couldn't apologize to Dan fast enough. First of all, it was like this, as soon as this thing was over, it's like, and I went and apologized to Howard and everything else. And I take umbrage to the fact that my boss went to you and said to you what he said, because I do not think to this day that I was owed an apology from you. I think you put me in my place and were a big enough man to respect me, another guy, to tell me what was right and what was wrong in that instant and not let it go. And that's one of those life lessons that I have taken from my 20s into my 40s that has always stayed with me. And, you know, people who love you and care about you as a human being, and in terms of wanting the best for you and wherever it is that you're going to go next, those people will say the right thing, even when it's painful, when it matters and when it needs to be heard. And I don't think we do that enough anymore. So thank you for having the balls to say, hey, no, don't do that. Let's do the right thing when it matters.
You're very hard on yourself. I know it was a formative time in your life and career, but you're also very hard on yourself, David.
And you are very touchy-feely. And both are okay.
No. No, I mean, I can probably remember all the times I messed up and the ways in which I endeavored to fix it too. And yeah, I have stuff to say to people 20 years later, like, oh, I'm sorry I didn't take that moment more seriously, or I'm sorry I didn't give you the credit. You know, I didn't realize what you were carrying. But
I should illustrate why I brought that up. And part of it is because it's not, the primary reason is not I'm going to air laundry, and that's not the intent here. The intent is the joy of bringing us all together, and laughing at some things at our own expense later, but also I'm trying to create a program with Dial the Gate that enables people to illustrate the parts of their lives where they made mistakes and learn something from them. And so what you hear as me being hard on myself is me trying to, I've got a hair up my nose that is driving me nuts, folks. And
you're
I apologize.
cutting that out, aren't you?
Oh, sure. You know I'm not. I am trying to illustrate that there is catharsis, and there are good things to be found in admitting where you could have done, when you could have done better.
Sure, you can take accountability. Sure. But also, I like the fact that you recognize now, you know, looking back, you can look at it objectively and see what Dan was actually offering to you in that moment.
For this one, I knew it in 5 minutes. I had to get over the fact that I was standing in front of a group of people and just had been defenestrated to a small degree. And then once I got over, it was before my presentation was done. It was like, I see what he did there. Because I know that he's an honorable person. I know his character, and I know why that was done. He was defending the man who he brought on, but also he was doing it for me. So
you can't defenestrate someone when it's a windowless room,
have you seen RoboCop?
So, oh wow. But the other thing I was going to say is, when you keep saying my boss, was that Darren? Is that who you're talking?
Darren Steele.
Yeah, okay.
Because Darren was sitting in the room too. And I appreciated that Darren went to bat for me. But what I told Darren then, and what I feel now, is that wasn't, it wasn't appropriate because Dan wasn't wrong. So that's I mean, could Dan have perhaps said it a little differently?
Most likely.
But at the same time,
Darren was always about making sure that the dev team and the the marketing and community happened to fall later under, which is kind of when you got there, David. I think they were transitioning from being under production to under marketing.
Exactly. And then we went downstairs around the same time, and it felt very disconnected, as a result. But to finish off my earlier point, I can only guess, Dan, that you said it the way that you said it because you knew that I could take it, and you knew that I would walk away with that as a life lesson from that meeting. So,
but it's amazing to me. In those times, right, there was a lot of passion, right?
Yeah.
We had a bunch of passionate people in those rooms fighting tooth and nail for so many different things, right? And it's like we were all trying to just, do our best and figure this out as we were going. And I recall there was a couple scenarios where somebody would come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh man, you didn't say hi to me in the hall or something like that, or you were rude to me or something like that." And I'm like, I don't remember that at all.
You were
And
putting out 3 fires on your way down the
yeah,
hall. Yeah.
and I'm sorry. It is just, whatever the reason I did that, it wasn't personal type of thing. And I think that we're also close enough as a group, right? We're very tight knit that I think we wanted to be able to sort of have hard conversations, right? Because if you ask me even today, right, it's the best way to deal with conflict is head on, right? It's like you always you don't let things linger. So the
Yeah, they
faster
fester.
you nip it right,
Yeah.
to say, all right, what are we trying to fight here? Because I can't remember I don't know if this was Bucher or a couple engineers, but they were going at it like on Slack or I can't remember what we're using for our communication, email probably. And they were just,
Skype, right?
yeah, Sky. It was like back and forth. Like, it
Oh
was
my
like
God.
paragraphs, back and forth, back and
Yeah.
forth. And finally, I get up and I walk over to the engineering bullpen, and these two engineers are literally sitting back to back, and they're just going online at each other. And literally, it was just a matter of just turning both chairs around. Please just talk,
Yeah.
right? And that's what it took. It's like the faster we can sort of. I think that helped a lot of us just get through a lot of those hard moments. Is it was just that instant, like, all right, feedback, right? Like we need to make sure that none of these issues. And I had no problem with Darren coming to me and saying, "Hey, yeah, maybe you were too short with that," and to be able to
Yeah.
sort of follow up with it because it's at the same. I have to live by the same rules, right? If I'm causing conflict, I expect somebody to call me out on it and to be able to say, "No, dude, you were wrong on that. You need to work through that." And even it doesn't really matter, if I was right or wrong. It's still that was a conflict that we needed to make sure
Yeah.
was worked through, right? And no
Was
matter what's
there
good.
was there a single dumb person on the team? Like some of this is stemming from the fact that there are all these brilliant minds. Everybody's got their own version of the game in their head, including David, including me, including Darren. Everyone in engineering is envisioning this thing. And yes, as we see the concept art and then the art and then the systems and then, the tools and everything else and animations, then our vision starts to align with the actual vision. But in the meantime, in our minds, what we're doing is of grave importance and everything that we're envisioning is how it should be. And so you're gonna, like, I think of engineering and the brilliance just in that, in that 10 by 20 meter room and how brilliant they all are. Like,
Oh man, the IQ scores of the people in there just
Very.
ridiculous. And I remember certain days of being like, okay, there was like a note or something, or this was crunch week, or I forget the word that you guys called it, but it's like, don't walk into engineering.
Do
They
not.
have their heads down. They are working
Yeah.
towards this milestone
Yeah.
or whatever the technical term
no
was.
distractions.
And you just stayed out of their way
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
was time to hit certain things.
But
Yeah,
they're
no, they
brilliant.
did an amazing
Right.
job with it.
Cover. Did you have to fight to get this implemented when it was decided that we were going to have the first ever cover system in a
Speaking of
MMO
engineering.
until the Tabula Rasa guys came over and decided that they were going to just pull that rug right out from under us before we were going to release? Because I heard this after the pact. They came and saw us. This may be an urban legend. And came and visited, and then like the following week announced that they were going to have a cover system put into their game, and it was like that was like going to be our thing. That was like going to be one of the things that was shipped on the box, was that this was a part
that
of
was a
our design that we were introducing to the MMO space. Is that correct, or am I remembering that completely wrong?
No, it's the cover system. I remember, so back when I was at EA working on Medal of Honor and thinking about how we utilize cover within Medal of Honor and then how we built the worlds to utilize cover. If you think about it, programmatically, especially when you're talking a bunch of NPCs, how they see the world is obviously not like a player, right? They don't see that cover. So you got to insert all those different elements into the environment to ensure that NPCs can see and utilize cover. So I remember, before I left EA and Medal of Honor, we were working on cover systems, and I just thought it was just so brilliant how it changed the dynamics of how NPCs move throughout the world. Because if you remember the old Medal of Honor games, it was just, all these NPCs would just start streaming out of the woodworks, and you just sit there and you just mow them all down. and there was really no sort of thought process to it. But they were evolving to utilize more cover and more of that evolution. So coming into Stargate and thinking about, oh, here we are, we have a lot of the same mechanics of just a shooter game, but even though we're third person, and we also have a lot of NPCs, and we didn't want to be just like any typical environment like in Warcraft or any other MMO where you walk into sort of a group of NPCs and you just start mowing them all down and tossing out spells. And we wanted to have the world be more dynamic. And I think that was a killer feature that really did set us apart of, as an MMO, but it still allowed us to have a lot of the same dynamic, NPC hotspots. But they just felt like every single time you engage with it, the NPCs would just do something different. And it was a lot of fun to sort of see those things starting to come together. And it was a shame that we couldn't get it out there, and then somebody else sort of took that idea and ran with it.
It was and when I talk about cover to anyone who's still not being completely aware, like using terrain or objects to conceal yourselves from enemy, either in approaching them or in combat to protect yourself from ammunition that's coming your way. Staff blasts or bullets. The thing that just blew me away that you guys had working, and it's something that Katie illustrated in the last episode that we did, was that you could enter a room, you could fire at something, or they could spot you, and then your team would go towards these things, and then the others would flank and then come at you from the sides. And it was like, that's wild. They're engaging with one another in a way where they're going to come and get you if you don't think strategically to get yourself out of it. Because especially like one's going to come straight and then these two are going to come from the side. And like that had never been seen in a game before, to my knowledge, at least nothing of this type. And you guys were doing it. You were pulling it off. And it was, and with Nick's engagement system, with the music playing in there, it got intense.
And the UI was starting to feel good, right? It's like it had like the little indicator of where you were in cover, and it sort of shifted based on where you were in the object, and it was very dynamic on how you sort of moved throughout the world. And
the cameras were great. And
it started feeling really good. Like we spent a lot of time like in that moment to moment gameplay to sort of get that to sort of feel right. And I know I saw some reviews where they're talking about some of the UI being too busy, and we were sort of in this world of MMO / third person shooter game, and we're trying to marry those two to sort of fill with all the different abilities and all the other things, and so it was trying to get both of those to feel right. It took a lot of iteration.
That's every game I've ever worked on, especially early days. It's always the UI is too cluttered because you have all these elements. You're trying to be immersive, but you're also trying to give them all the tools, right? And unless you're a very, very simple game, you need all of that. Do you remember, I think you were there, Dan, when we had Nicole Lazzaro come from XEODesign and play and review the onboarding experience and the first time player experience and the experience of the UI and stuff. I just want to give her a shout out because she's awesome. But like I just think the team seemed to be ahead of its time in being able to pinpoint any weakness that, I don't have UX experience. Do you know? Does somebody know? Well, then we'll get somebody in. We'll get this third party. I know we had third party doing some QA and some weapons design, and so I mean, working with teams before and since, there is some of that on some teams, but it takes a pretty big team to find those gaps and to be willing to reach out, especially if there's no hiring budget at that moment to bring someone on full time, to reach out and get somebody in the gap. Did we, I mean, I don't know if I was privy to all of it, but was that your experience at other studios, or was this something that was kind of unique to Stargate?
No, I've always believed in, utilizing third party, resources, because, how do you stay slim in a world where studios are building 300 to 400, man teams, and how do you compete with that, right? And you have to use third party vendors to be able to do that, because you can't, just hire 300 people and then, at the end of it, not be able to not know what to do with them. And that's, I think, the fault of a lot of AAA studios. And so, yeah, using third-party studios is the way to sort of bring in like co-dev, and we use that for a lot of art assets. We had Howard and his team, bringing all the ideas to life, and then we'd farm it out to other studios to sort of help create those assets. And same thing with design, right? Like at some point in time, you're at your limits of what your capabilities are, and so you needed to reach out to sort of bring those in. And it's so we built up a good network of other co-dev studios to help us out with a lot of that stuff.
Were there any specific components to this machine that you guys were building that you honestly thought, I don't know how we're going to get this done? I would love for us to be able to create XYZ, but there's just like, I'm not seeing a way to achieve that. I'm going to pull in Indiana Jones and I'm just going to take a leap of faith here that the technology is there and we will find a way to crack this thing.
I think the things that at some point in time, I think each discipline went through that phase of, oh crap, how are we going to be able to tackle this? It's like there's so much to do within each one of those realms with design. There's so many different systems you have to go build, and we don't have the resources to be able to do it. And art for sure is like, you think about, oh cool, you can go through a Stargate and each one is a new world. It's like, oh crap, you have to go through a Stargate and each one is have to build each one of those assets. And it's like Howard was able, he's painting these things and he's building up all these different visuals, but how do you then go through and have each one of those assets created and or animated, and then you have Nick pumping out these sound effects, like a full dev studio of sound designers. Like he was just a machine and just doing that. And it's just each one of those disciplines that went through that realm of like, okay, how are we going to figure out how we piece all these different elements together? And it's like either we did that through co-dev or we had the team that just worked miracles to sort of pull certain things. But I think Nick talked last time about Chance, coming in and helping out with some of the audio assets, and and we underestimated what Nick could do, right? Nick just,
oh yeah,
he took that out. He almost took that as a challenge, like, oh, you're gonna bring somebody else in to bring assets? No, I got this, right? And he would just start just delivering, tenfold of what anybody could do, and it's like each department sort of took each one of those sort of challenges ahead of them and started building out these these different elements to really accelerate our production cycle that beyond any team our size could normally do.
Tell me about Minigames. I remember you sending me a message saying, come upstairs at XY time if you're well, we've confirmed the time. Come upstairs and bring your camera. And I've tried to find the video and I don't know if I've got it anymore. But you and Chris Klug had a bet on Minigames. Do you recall this?
I don't. You gotta fill me in on this one.
So there was a specific milestone, or it was just at all being able to get Minigames into Stargate Worlds. And and Chris is standing there and you're standing there and I'm taping, and you say, Chris believed that we wouldn't be able to get, or challenged us to get Minigames into Stargate Worlds. And he said that if we would get Minigames into Stargate Worlds, Chris would dance for us. So now we're going to see Minigames working in Stargate Worlds, and then we are going to see Chris dance. And that's exactly
was it
what
April 1st?
happened.
It wasn't like April 1st or anything?
No, the Minigames were working. They got them to work.
Wow.
And Chris did a little jig, unlike any I have ever seen before or since. It was, I wouldn't call it dancing, but it was wonderful to get that on film and to see this architecture being implemented on top of this world was just so cool. And it's one of the things that I, as a gamer, I fancy myself a gamer, that I haven't played in ages, that I'm also a Stargate fan, was really looking forward to seeing, like, what was this going to look like? What was how were they going to implement this and pull this off? And what was the level of difficulty? How intuitive would they have been? Can you talk anything about that process? Because you had the 36,000 foot view. You got to tell them, go implement this thing, and here's our target for this.
And the trick, if I recall correctly, is it was a little bit like we talked a little bit earlier, that it was hard. We have so much to do and so little time to do it. And how do we get it all in? And then you also had several people that were passionate about, oh, I had this idea that I want to get in there, like mini games or something like that. And they were so, I think, Chris was rightfully so. I was like, oh, that's too much. Like, we already have so many other things we need to get done. And then it was just a passion plea of one designer that, or one artist that's like, was really passionate about that, that would just go above and beyond and just, work to get that in, because they felt so strongly that that needed to be a key part of that gameplay. And, it's really hard to sort of, tell somebody like, oh, no, you can't do that, when they're just going to go the extra mile to just, get it done. Right. And it's like, and we had so many different times where we had, people just going up and just doing that type of sort of scenario of building up these amazing sort of, systems to get them in the game, because they just felt so passionate about getting them in. And I believe minigames was one of those things. And that became a core feature that, you look at a lot of the videos and minigames comes up almost all the time, of little wire cutting game and the sound effect that went through it. So it's not just like one designer like playing, I have a paper concept. It's that individual then working with audio and then working with art to be able to sort of, pull all those pieces together and then fit it into the schedule on top of everything else they got to get done. And it is that passion it's just contagious, because then, the next person wants to go and sort of build it and get it done. And, I'd love you guys to correct me if I'm wrong. I don't feel like we were a crunch team. I don't feel like we were a team that was killing ourselves. I think we worked hard and we worked, to sort of get things done. But I feel like we all had good life balance type of thing.
So a couple of times.
A grain of salt.
Yeah. I was going to say there were a couple of times where, oh, we need this by Leipzig, so everybody's going to kind of stay late on Thursday, but we'll bring pizza in. It was never like sit at your desk and bleed from the eyeballs. It was more, look, guys, tell you next week at this time. Like, this is another area where Erin and Rebecca were amazing, because they'd be like, okay, we're going to clear the decks. We're going to have, there's going to be places where if you need to nap, you can, like stuff like that. But they'd have food and they'd have just support systems in place if we were going to do this. I never had to crunch, but
yeah,
there were times that would get busier, but you guys would bake in all the considerations needed, like tell your wife, tell your kids, tell the babies.
I felt like we were realistic, right? We weren't trying to build, unrealistic sort of schedules type of thing. And again, maybe that's just me just, forgetting things over time and, those hard times of working those late hours.
Definitely the difference between, like, Joe and I had just come from UB.com, and the difference between what you call crunch there and Stargate Worlds, we all agreed that we never wanted to do or be that. And I don't know what EA was like, but I can imagine.
I mean, I was telling you guys before the call, is like, I was at EA during the EA spouse letters days, and people that have been in the industry long enough know what that means. And that's the environment I came from. Is, I'd have my executive producer calling me and say, oh, this other team's working the weekend, so you guys all need to come work the weekend. And like, wait, we're pre-production. Why are we working the weekend?
Right.
It's like, he wanted to show face of like, oh, my team's working hard, type of thing. And it was that type of mantra, so we'd lose our weekends and our nights all the time because somebody wanted to, play the political game of I'm better than you type of thing. So I don't think we came into Stargate not wanting that type of environment.
Right. We knew what we wanted and we knew what we didn't want, right? Having been other places that,
I think it's what the response that I've gotten from people that I've reached out to that we worked with, and from people who have reached out to me that we worked with, was this was a great place to be. This was a great place to work. And if you worked people to the bone, that is not what they recall 20 years from now. Now, some of them may have some saucy stories, but it was all about what went down at the end. It's not about the process of milestone to milestone. That was the term, right? You guys used milestones, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. I've just been throwing this term out. I was like, I hope it's the right one. And I would, one of the privileges of my position was that and Katie specifically, we would get to take the temperature of the devs along with the fan base. And there was never not that I can recall, a resentful person, that was part of that team who wasn't willing to say, yeah, I'm going to tighten my bootstraps just a little bit more because the next few miles are going to be some tough terrain, who weren't willing to absolutely go there. There was not one resentful person. And I know you're not asking this, but never did I ever hear a single person have a crossword for you. And I think considering the place that you're in, that's saying something, and that shouldn't be overlooked. So to have people look back on this thing 20 years later and be able to have the fond memories that they do of it, despite the crucible that they went through to get to where they are now, and the recession and everything else that was happening at that time, I think is a testament to your leadership. And I think that that's all there is to it.
I agree.
Well, thank you. I look back at that time, and you talk about like the emotional state of how that ended, and I still get emotional about it. I even talk to my wife. It's that those last few months were emotional, right, for all of us. You were losing friends, you were losing family members, of this passion project. We talk about all these amazing times that we had, working on this game, and those last few months, it wrecked us, right? And it really destroyed, us to the core of, and I'm sure we lost a lot of people to the game industry, right? It's like, okay, I'm not doing this. You lose all this amazing talent that, at that point in time, it's like, I'm not going to stay here with the game industry anymore, right? And you don't blame them, right? It's one of those things that is, financially was devastating to so many people, including myself. It was a reset to that environment. So hearing that, people still look back to, that team and think positively, even going through those hardships of how that ended it just, like I think I was telling you earlier, it just warms my heart. It is that because I don't think negatively about anybody at Cheyenne at this point in my life. Even though we probably had some passionate, conversations, or we had things that we did maybe get into some, heated conversations. I think even the Stargate Resistance team, awesome. You guys took what we couldn't get out the door, and you guys were able to sort of turn that around into something, at that time, at a very hard time. And I appreciate them. I give them a lot of credit for taking something that was just, what was left at that point, because so many people had left at that point, and trying to build something out of it. And so it's just, I think only positive things about everybody that was there.
I want to ask, one of the things that I found out about you was that you were a person who didn't quit. And one of the things that was told to me early on, this guy has never not shipped a title. And at that point, that didn't really mean anything to me, because it was this was the first thing that I had ever done in this space. And it's like, you ship. It's like, no, you don't always ship. Not everyone makes it to the finish line. This was the first title that you didn't ship. How do you look back on Worlds in that context? And what I asked Nick about this, Nick LaMartina. I said, look, you worked with Dan far more than Katie or I did. From your perspective, was there a point where the finish line was clearly visible? Was there a date that, okay, all things being equal as they are right now, we're going to hit this, and things just were not equal? And like, how do you want to approach the last third of this? Because part of me is that, if David will stop talking, is that I'm curious to know from your perspective, had folks from above just stayed out of the way and just continued to pay bills, what realistically could have been achieved and when? And was it a matter of, had that not happened, I could have been able to get this done? Or was it something else? Like, how do you look back on that particular period? And what do you have to say about that period?
So I guess answering a couple parts of that question is, when do I feel like we had a game and we were ready, we were getting close to ship, and that's, looking at Leipzig was, and we're, presenting the game pretty much for the first time. And, we had a lot of the gameplay and, we're in alpha, we had people on the servers and, we're starting to make this game, come. I thought, we could see the finish line. It doesn't take that much longer for us to sort of go through the steps. And at that point, it's just steps that you need to do to get it out the door. There wasn't anything blocking us. It's not like we hadn't figured out, core elements of what the game was. Like all those things were in place.
And that's middle 2008 for Leipzig, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think, yeah. And so it was at that point, it's like, okay, yeah, it's like, we could ship this game. And that's obviously, right after that is when things really started to hit us financially. And being an angel funded company that's, receiving funds, month to month, week to week, and then having the recession hit us, could we have, I look back as like, should I have focused more on what the front office was doing? Should I have spent more time making sure that, my budgets were in place of ensuring that, there were funds. There was a slush fund for rainy days to ensure that we had enough money. And at one point in time, I think we did have enough money to get through the finish line, but that was taken up through other decisions, or, however you want to put it, by the front office to, invest in other things. Were those poor investments? Given a good economy, no. But given a bad economy, yes, they were horrible investments. We should have focused on getting, what we all came there to do and ship Stargate World, and without the distraction of other entities or other items. But in a good environment, yes, those are great investments. They were planning for a potential good future that had multiple games coming out of the studio and building this up into something that was more than just Stargate World. And there were great concepts coming out of that studio. And but it's, again, hindsight is like, yes, I would have appreciated making sure that I had that money set aside so that no matter what, we could have focused on ensuring that Stargate World would have seen the light of day.
Did you have that level of control though?
I was focused purely on just Stargate, right? And ensuring that we were just, working on just that front office, and all those decisions on that front office were completely outside of that.
Exactly.
And so it's like I had no control. I mean, building out FireSky and the other studios, I was no part of that, type of thing. Right. Do I feel like maybe I should have, tried to be more forceful and trying to ensure a small startup? But I don't know.
I just remember hearing a lot of, well, diversifying our portfolio is a good thing. We really need to diversify this portfolio. And I had never really, at that point, I had only had like an IRA. I had no idea what that meant, which has since been diversified. But Katie and I have had that conversation about this thing needed to ship. You had to get your first one out the door. Mm-hmm. Your ice cream had to be strong enough to bring people in to the store. Then you could implement other flavors beyond your base ice cream. And from where I was sitting, it seemed to be ambition was outweighing the target for the game to be what it was before the ambition had any real business of being the way that it was. And I don't know if that's because foxes were let into the hen house, or it was baked into the cake from the beginning. But it's frustrating to see that this thing was working, and then no one could see that the financial crash was coming. And it really did play a big part in the undoing of this.
And even when we could see it coming, it was always just give us 2 weeks, just give us two, like there was always going to be, I mean, we all prayed for a miracle or for it to turn around or for it to get better, but like Dan said, the recession on top of all of that just left our angel investors pretty scared for good reason.
Yeah.
No, it's towards that end. It was week to week, right? It's, are we going to get enough funds to pay the team? And not only are we going to have enough funds to pay the team, what funds we do get, where do those funds? Because there's a lot of times where we get funds, but not enough to pay the entire team. And so it was like, okay, it was a decision of, do I pay everybody 20%? Do I pay just these level,
Just the artists,
just the artists,
engineers,
and those were decisions that I was dealing with almost weekly. They'd come to me and say, this is how much money we got.
And that's not what you signed on to do.
No, and it's like, okay, and so I, make sure we get as much money get to the right people as quick as we could. Because, everybody was like, oh crap, if I don't get paid this week, I'm not gonna be able to pay my rent. And they were, the people were losing, large sums of their investments and their livelihoods. And how long can you live in an environment like that where every week you're just trying to make a decision of, who gets paid and who doesn't get paid, type of thing.
I can't imagine going through that.
Brutal.
And so it rips your heart out. And it's, there's months where, yes, certain people just didn't get paid, including myself. And you just figure it out.
Well, I mean, at the start of it all was kind of fall, and then that first Christmas, right? That holiday season was when it began. And that, I mean, I kept in touch. I was gone and David followed, I think 6 months later, but at the time,
June of 08 was when I stepped out.
Okay. Yeah. And then by August, they had asked me to leave. And I do remember Darren using some language about the fact that it wasn't based on merit, that there were larger things afoot and larger contributing factors. And I literally took that to mean, oh, it's because I didn't move there, and I didn't immigrate to the States, and maybe that was part of it. And then fast forward a couple of months where my friends, my amazing dear friends, are going through this, and I'm like, oh, I was one of the lucky ones. Like I told you, I got chucked off the Titanic.
Well, it's the thing that kills me. There's so many different things that kills me, but one of the things that kills me is not only did we obviously go through this horrible time and having to say goodbye to friends in a very difficult situation. At that point in time, we're also, my job was helping people find jobs, right? And one, I was helping them to get paid, and then two, I was like, all right, what connections do I have so and so to be able to get people find jobs? And some of those went to other studios, like 38 Studios, and that's another can of worms of I think they went through the same thing we did, but tenfold, right? It was a bigger studio with a lot more money involved, and and I actually talked to those guys. I think there was at one point in time that I went and visited that studio and saw a lot of our former folks there, and it's like they were at their pinnacle of where they were at, but they were at that point. The baseball player, I can't remember his name, he was selling off his Kurt Schilling. He was selling off his own material just to get people paid at some point in time. And it's like, and then they ended up folding, and I want to say Rebecca was there too. I think she was there.
I think she and Matt maybe.
Yeah, so they went through it twice.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, so for Joe and me, Stargate was the second one for us. Well, actually, for Joe, it might have been even third or fourth when you consider Matrix, right? But then, I mean, you and I went to Net Devil. I went to Gazillion. You went to Net Devil. A few went to Net Devil, right? Jay, Jason. But then your project went great, and mine was Axed. So that was number 3 for me, Jumpgate Evolution. So then I'm like, oh, it's me. Like it's
I must be cursed.
I'm the problem. It's me. So yeah, you do go through it. Well, then, despite having worked on it, another MMO, a kids MMO that I had worked on, did get released. So that was good, even though I wasn't there when it launched. But it's like, okay, maybe it's not. And since then, of course, have shipped stuff, but it's tough.
It's tough.
And it's weird because when you go through it over and over again, and I can name names of people who it happened to even more than 2 or 3 times. Like
recently too, right? Look at the game industry that it is today.
Oh,
right?
Today, I mean, now we're all used to it. Right now, when it happens, you're like, all right, we've prepared for this because this has happened to us n times. But yeah, back then it was very new, and we were surrounded by things that were doing well, and that were getting this fairy tale ending, and we just weren't. So yeah, it was rough. It was rough. There were a few of us that looked at each other and were like, "Is it me?" So yeah. Yeah, it was rough watching people have to go through it multiple times.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, no matter how many times you go through it, right, and no matter how many times it's not your fault, right? It's nothing you did. No matter how good of a job you did, you still look at yourself as the problem, right? It's very human to think, is it me? Like, what am I doing wrong?
Right.
I remember, just when I finally did leave and I went to Net Double and, I was working with those guys, my wife posted, on her blog about leaving, and some news agency picked it up, for my wife's blog that I left, type of thing. And that Cheyenne, because nobody communicated to the press that Cheyenne was going through all this hardship.
Oh my gosh.
And so it was like this first article was based off my wife's blog that we were moving and leaving Cheyenne and type of thing. And my wife was just devastated. Yeah, just all this news of, the team had been impacted and all that stuff, and just we left, and it's just, I don't think she closed that blog immediately, and I don't think she ever reopened it, type of thing.
Oh, poor thing, because she probably did people a favor doing it,
Yeah. It needed to get out there, right?
Poor Allie.
That's the thing, no one knew what was going on. So I actually, in my homework to this, I found that. I wasn't looking for it. I didn't even know it existed before yesterday. And I clicked on it, and it said that this original source is now private. And I was like, oh, okay. And I'm just now hearing, because I found the news story that it was created from, and then I went and looked it up. And so it's just like years later, these little pieces of information are all that remain from that time. And in some cases is all there was, because it was just, I mean, people were in shock, this thing was going to be a success. And I think it's a great life lesson. It was one of the other things that I wanted to get to next about life lessons, is that you can't always take things for granted. You do at your peril, because you're not the be all end all in control of your destiny. And there are certain things that have to happen. And if they don't, it doesn't matter if you turn left or turn right. It doesn't matter if you move this deck chair over here or over there. The thing is still hitting the iceberg. And so that's all there is to it.
You're always going to be surrounded by people who are making choices every day that can affect you, right? You can make all the right choices, but if somebody has a different idea of what's right or good,
I mean, that's a common question I get, right? Why did this fail, right? What would you have done differently if you knew that this was going to hit the iceberg per se.
Sure.
Would you have tried, yes, I would have shipped sooner, or yes, I would have created, smaller content, and, but it's one of those things where when you're selling that ship, you don't, your whole mission is to make that thing as awesome as possible and as big as possible to sort of meet all the needs of the fans and of the investors to sort of really make sure you're hitting a home run. And until you hit that iceberg, is like none of that hindsight matters, right? It's like you're just trying to make a great game. And it's like, I've had people make the comment to me, is like, oh, I would have had smaller worlds and I would have, like, yes, I agree.
Sure. That's easy to say. Well, I'm going to say it didn't fail. Like you say, when people say, why did it fail? The game itself, the team itself didn't fail. Neither of those things failed in my mind.
It ran out of money. That's not the same in this context as the product not working. The product was working.
And it's not us. It's not Burn Down and it's not Runway.
Yeah.
It literally isn't any of those things. And so we didn't fail. The game wouldn't have failed, I don't believe. And it wasn't failing at the time.
Yeah. And you look at like all the content of Stargate games that were either out previously or out, even after us. Stargate Worlds was an amazing game. It had a great base. It had a great concept. The design was solid. The worlds it was a great game. And I think all of our lives, it would have changed dramatically if we would have been able to ship that game like we all planned, right? Because that success of a game like that would have changed, all of our resumes of how we would have been able to, going from there. But at the same time, I looked at LinkedIn of a lot of people on the team and a lot of our connections, and they're all directors, executive producers, and they're all doing awesome, right? If they stayed in the game industry, they're doing amazing. Rightfully so, because they had the talent, and now it just took maybe a little extra to sort of get that to the next level type of thing.
And one's the host of Dial the Gate.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Look how far you come.
No, the life is not guaranteed. None of us are guaranteed a rosy path. And you can let those troubled years destroy you, or you can accept the fact that this is a part of your journey and derive the lessons from it that you're going to take with you for that next raid that you and your guild are going to get together to fight.
If you're wise, you'll use the lessons, right?
That's it. You can just say, oh, owie, woe is me. It's like, sure. But what's that going to get you at the end? There is a certain utility in saying, what could I have done differently to make this different? What could I have done differently to change the outcome? I think there is a certain amount of self-assessment that is healthy, that if you don't do that, or if you're a type of person who doesn't do that, you may be the type of person who is incapable of taking accountability for anything. And that in itself, you want to talk, there be dragons in that direction for sure. So I do think that is a good way to lead your life. Getting subsumed and swamped in that thinking to where it paralyzes you or makes you leave an industry, I think is probably going too far. And for anyone who did that with this game, who had their sights set on the video game industry, that would be a real shame. But not with the people that I've talked with.
Yeah, no, that's what we talk about. We talk about all these amazing people, and they're still amazing, right? They're doing amazing things and changing, these industries and these games for the better because of that talent they're able to bring to it. You look at it as like, okay, well, you're right. Like, what lessons did I learn, and what did I? Now that I can look even further back, it's like, what did I take to some of the other games I worked on and some of the other studios? Was I a little bit more cautious with the next MMO that I worked on, or the next game of how did I sort of change that approach? And yeah, absolutely. It's like I feel like I'm a better employee or a better sort of developer because I had some of these harder things that I had to deal with. That a lot of especially in a young game industry like we have, where there's so many people that just don't have this experience. It's like, yeah, I can see those dragons. I can see those things that that nobody else has seen or had to see because, I've lived it multiple times and been able
you've been to battle with them.
Yeah. And we can sort of, see that thing long before it hits the iceberg, and we can shift gears. And, I've been able to have some great games that have been able to get it out the door, and to avoid some of those conflicts. And I've hit some of those icebergs again, in some other studios, right? It's just, but I do think that, at the long run, no matter how hard and how painful they've been, that's why I look back at Stargate as such a amazing team and an amazing time in my life, because that battle and that time in those trenches is just, you'll never forget, because they're just so close to your heart.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
much
I mean,
more good than bad. Much more good.
it would have,
absolutely.
it would have been nice to hang the game on my wall for sure. But I mean, you've got something far more precious behind you there to your right. And frankly, well, I was going to give you my copy of this one, but evidently you don't need it. So I'm just gonna put this back over here. But that was going to be yours. That belonged to you if you didn't already have one.
Does Nick have one?
I have that.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
I do too somewhere. We moved, so I.
But signed. I mean, you have the signed one, as you should. So I mean, because this is your team, and they accomplished what they accomplished very much in part, if not entirely, because of a cool head that they had looking over them. And it means so much to me to be able to have this conversation with you and Katie now, to let you know how much you have meant to us, and to remind you of how much you meant to that team. Who do you miss the most from that project? And frankly, who are you looking forward to seeing next here?
The right answer is me, Dan, by the way.
Well, Katie, when you popped up on my LinkedIn, and then when I saw Nick's post with the dial of the gate, I was clicking on that thing so fast. I made my comment long before I even finished watching the video.
Oh, really?
It's so I was like, I couldn't wait to sort of see, the video and the team, and like I was saying, like Howard, I've sort of reconnected with him, and and like I've had the pleasure of having Rebecca and Erin, have little touch points throughout my career, and it's so hard to there's so many amazing people. It's funny because I was actually, just before the call, I'd stand over there by the poster and I'm reading all the names. I'm like, oh yeah, I totally remember them. It's like, but you haven't thought about them for years because you just haven't crossed paths. And
that's right.
Every single one of those names on that wall, I have just fond memories of them. Even if we, it went in a negative way, or we had a part on rough terms, it's like my memories of everybody that I had to deal with in that studio was just positive in my mind. And and that includes all the folks in FireSky, because I think they were all just a bunch of passionate developers trying to make something great. And I have a ton of respect for them and what they were able to sort of do with the work that they were able to do. So it's I don't want to go through and list out names, because then I feel like I miss
for
one or two people, right?
No. It was just to put you on the spot, but same every time. Like when Nick did his post and I see the names of the people that are liking it, that are commenting, I'm like, oh, like every time David or I remember another name, we yell the name out, right? Like we'll see a name, like RC.
We're still building it. Yeah, we're still building the list on the back end. And it's like, how did I forget this person? It's like, it's been 20 years.
You just said Austin.
There's only so much.
When you got in the call, you said Austin. I'm like, Austin. Like how are we remembering all these names?
So I mean, Austin and I, we're dear friends, right? Austin, I play games with him every Sunday night. He and I, we went on a trip, once in a lifetime trip, into the Canyonlands National Park, and we spent a weekend in the White Rim Trail, and we just have all these memories of this lifetime of just being good friends and playing games together, right? And it's just but I feel like I can pick up that time with almost anybody in that studio, and I can sit down and we can have a meal with anybody and just have a good time, and just talk about these fond memories with each other of just spending that precious few years together, and just how much we miss and wish we could have that back.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a good time. Those were good times.
We get too far from it, you have a Jaffa over your right shoulder here. Can you bring that character to the foreground? Tell us
absolutely.
who made it, and give us a little story here. So I have never seen this colored before. I have only seen it in gray clay. So I'm very interested. Oh my gosh.
So Irene is the original sculptor. She's one of our animators on the team. And then my mom, who's a painter, painted this for me.
Wow.
And you'll see that she's got quite the lean to her. And that's just from moving boxes, sitting in the heat, through different moves.
Oh,
but that's not how she was originally sort of sculpted, but she's still on stand. She sits up here in the top corner. I had to bring her out because, I mean, she's so well done with so many, different little pieces here. I'm amazed that she's been able to survive all these years.
Irene Matar, animator on Stargate Worlds, and the fact that an incredible sculptor. Can we see the business end of that staff weapon at the bottom there?
Oh yeah,
there, man! Look at that.
I know the details.
It's just so cool.
I mean, it was just so well sculpted, and the fact that I was able to add some color to it with because my mom she just has so many different skills of just painting. I never got those painting skills, so I don't know. It skipped a generation. My kids, amazing artists, but not me.
Very cool.
But she's definitely always on my shelf, and again, it's like again, the poster's always there. Every office I've had since then, I've always had the poster, and then the Jaffa has always been there to sort of a key reminder of just I love talking about it, and so I love having it on my wall in my office.
Anything else that Stargate fans should know as we go through this series? I'm hoping that we're starting something that we're still going to be picking away at, for a good long while, because there are a lot of stories to tell. Or does this all pretty much just sum it up? I know we're going to get off the phone and it's going to be like I didn't talk about this. One of the things I didn't talk about with Dan was yes, for sure. But like universe, Nick's work is in universe. David Blue is playing that character at the very beginning in the introductory scene. Did you have anything to do with that? Can you tell us about that? That's a canon use of that content.
Well, that was back in the day when we were still making, or the game was still strong, right? We built that little level, obviously for universe, and it was directed to ensure that it was, had the right gameplay to sort of be the best part within that scene. But that was all solid gameplay, and it translated so well into that scene that it was like that was the game we were making. It wasn't that far off from making that game, and we were still at that peak of like, no, it's just a matter of time before we can take that and ship it. So it was fun to be able to have that highlighted, but then it was a little bit of a stab in the heart, seeing that after the fact, after we did go through those hard times, and knowing that that game that he's playing won't actually make it out the door.
What the hell?
What happened?
Nothing.
Oh my gosh, I was so proud.
Agnos is canon. It's a part of the the story that exists. And I remember thinking I was so proud of that when I saw Air Part 1 for the first time, because it was like, our part of our creation got into this thing, and no one can take that from us.
Because that was also on the Midway, right? Or on the ship, where we were able to sort of show that off, and also had the trailer there, and we had the after party with all the show creators, and I don't know if you guys remember that we were going through the voice actors, and Christopher Judge and all the other actors were like, yeah, sign me up, yeah, I'll do it, but we couldn't get Richard Dean Anderson. His agent just told us flat no. Like, it was like usually there's a lot of money in there. It just came back and said, no, we can't do it. But then we got to the Comic-Con, and we were on the show at the red carpet, and he's sitting there watching all this content. He's like, why aren't I part of this game? And like apparently him and his agent weren't talking. And so there was this conversation like, I'd love to be part of this game. So there was still a lot of, heated sort of debate between him and his agent trying to, get him to be able to agree to be able to do the voice acting for the game. But he was game. He was all for it. But it was just his agent that was just being tough to be able to sort of get him through the door.
Yeah, they're those gatekeepers, and sometimes the gatekeepers don't necessarily share everything with their clients because they want X, Y, or Z, and it's like the client doesn't always know, and you have to. Sometimes you just have no choice. But yeah, any other highlights from the Midway? Katie, you brought this up, and I almost blew completely by it.
Yeah,
the funny thing is, I went to Comic-Con. I packed my jeans, my t-shirts. I had, I think we knew about the red carpet and that type of stuff. I wasn't planning on being on the red carpet. And, they called me up and they're like, hey, you need a suit. I'm like, I'm in San Diego. I don't live here. I don't have a suit. I didn't bring it. And so I went down to whatever Nordstrom's or whatever it was and bought a suit, right before I went onto the red carpet.
Yeah.
And just, in order to match the vibe. It's funny because, as you get on the red carpet, I was, the press was sitting there asking me questions, and it is one of those scenarios like, oh, yeah, I was just vibing. Yeah, it's like the questions and the answers are going well. And then he goes, all right, we're going to turn the camera on now. And the camera wasn't even on. And it's like, it's like after that, it's like I felt like I just fell on my face. It's like, oh crap! It became a lot harder to answer the questions, but it was just like one of those moments of surreal, sort of being on the red carpet with these actors. I was the warm up to get the actors.
I was on that carpet line with the as press, and I don't remember interviewing you. I don't know how we skipped each other. That would have been interesting at that point for me.
Oh, for sure. It is, the show, the actors, it was great humanizing them, right? Obviously, because you put them up on a pedestal, and some of them were actors, right? They were through and through Hollywood actors, and some of them were just down to earth, like Christopher Judge, and just really just nice people, real. But I remember also with Brad Wright talking to him, and he was just such an amazing supporter for Stargate Worlds. Like he had our back through everything. Even sitting on the panel at Comic-Con, he's like, he would just talk us up. Just coming from him and saying how amazing we were and how awesome this game was, and just doing everything in his power to sort of support us was just, is invigorating. Sometimes I look at how did we score that license from this amazing license from this small studio in Arizona to be able to make this game. And one of my last heartbreaks, before I left to go to NetDevil, was sending him an email and telling him that I was leaving and that it would just, the game wasn't going to come to fruition because of, the financial situation we were in. And just, that was a really hard email. And he replied, and he was very gracious and, obviously disappointed that, we weren't able to get this game out because he was such a passionate follower and supporter of our game, and I'm sure he was definitely saddened to see it not happen, type of thing, because that was his baby. Stargate for many years was something he put a lot of passion behind, and that we weren't able to deliver on part of that vision was hard.
Was the Midway the first time that you had met him in person?
I think it was at the panel.
Okay.
That's right, the panel at Comic-Con in the big hall. Yeah,
that was massive.
Ballroom 20. Yeah.
It's like I've never been in front of a crowd that big or since then.
4,000 people, man.
Yeah, because they put us between SG1 and Atlantis, or the other way around, so that people had to stay for us if they were staying for the other two panels. But yeah, that was great. That was great fun.
Yeah, it was great time. They were just, like I said, just such a generous and supportive of us. And yeah, I mean, I've worked with a lot of IPs since then, and it's rare to have that strong of a supporter from your IP holder that's willing to help you out.
Brad worked as the moderator for that panel and was asking you guys questions. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's such a good, the show creators and the actors were just, such great people to work with.
Amazing people, yeah. They all were. We had so much fun with them at Comic-Con, all of them. Everybody, like you say, the talent sometimes can be the talent, but most of the time they're just, oh, my name's Amanda. How are you? How old are your kids?
Yeah.
Or Mike
That's
saying, "Don't tell Lexa that I'm having a cigarette, but let's go to sleep." Like just stuff like that. They're just so nice, and they're so sweet, and they genuinely were. It was such a new thing for them. We often got questions, like explain how this is all going to work, or because they didn't know what World of Warcraft was necessarily, or they didn't. Their kids were playing maybe Game Boys, but nothing to the extent that SGW was going to be. So, they had a lot of really good questions and a lot of healthy interest in it, which was nice.
Yeah, no, they were all super excited about it and were willing to sort of do whatever they could. I didn't judge. Christopher judged. He came to the office once, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Oh yeah.
He sure did. He got his photos with the team. Yeah, I got a couple of them for sure. Yeah, and Cliff Simon, who was also there at the Midway, and may he rest in peace. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
that broke my heart.
It was good times. It was good times. Dan, this has been great. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you for being brave enough to brave is not even the right word. Thank you for being willing to come on and be part of this, because you didn't know what it was going to be. You didn't know what we were going to ask, and I feel very privileged to have with Katie had this time with you to sit down and just remember a poignant part of our lives, for better and for worse. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Mostly better. And like I said, I mean, just hearing your names and seeing you guys on the video, I have nothing but positive things about you guys and just everything you guys are doing. And I really appreciate everything you guys have done to sort of, continue to make this a positive experience, even because it could have taken it in a completely different direction, right? It could have been this, you could have reflected on just the negative and made this out to be this horrible experience. And that's not how most of us reflect on this, is because it was such an amazing time.
Yeah, it was. And large part thanks to you. Like, it's all from the top down, and knowing we could count on you, and the even keeled temperament, and the you were just great, Dan. You were always very patient and kind and generous with your time. I know there were times you were probably walking down the hall putting out 3 fires in your mind, and I never got that impression. I never felt like you didn't see me or say hi. Yeah, so and stop and take time to because you had a game to ship, and community is a very different thing, right? Like, we're always looking outward and getting the questions, and you were always really generous with us and with the community. So thanks for that too.
Katie shared, I guess this was while I was there. Katie and I were on a lunch break somewhere. We were doing something, and she made a comment to me. I was passing by I being Katie, I was passing by the big board where we had all of our milestones, and she was hearing singing, and she came around the corner and she said, "Dan, is that you?" And I don't know if you remember this, Katie. And
I don't.
Yeah, were you just singing? She's like, "Yeah, I'm in my happy place."
And that's a lot for me to sing, right? It's like I'm not a singer.
You must have been very happy. Yeah, it was.
Must have been a really good mood.
That's a good note to end it on. That it was our happy place for a few years, all of us. So yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
It's a great chapter. I'm so privileged to have had the opportunity to work with you, and
Likewise.
To be able to have the two of you on today meant everything to me. So thank you.
Yeah, and let's keep these conversations going. I don't want to wait another 10 plus years to see your guys' face and have these conversations. So life is too short. Please let's keep talking.
Absolutely.
Sure. Isn't he the best?
That was wild. He's
so lovely.
I knew what we were going to get, and I didn't know what we were going to get. Is that even remotely possible?
Yes, because I had the same feeling. I thought, yeah, he's gonna have some good, some good stories that we don't even remember, and some depth to some things that we do remember. But also, I wasn't sure if he would hold back at all. No, he was he was right
It's a
there.
perfect balance.
It was really good to talk to him. It was good to see him again. It was good to hear those memories. I'm glad he has carried so many positives out of it. That's been, because that's what I want for everyone that we talk to, but especially for the good guys. Not that they all aren't good in some way, but he's one of the best. So I'm glad that he has been able to carry that with him as a good thing.
This has been,
he deserves that.
Absolutely. This has been so cathartic for me. And that's the word that I keep hearing from the devs who have reached out to me and you since this, that there is a certain amount of healing that comes with time, but also hearing things at a time when you're prepared to hear them. And when a certain amount of distance has occurred. And I don't ever think that it's too late to heal. I think that things happened to these people that were beyond their control. And it's very easy to live in despair from those experiences and to carry absolute sheer resentment from that time. And from the people I've communicated with and who have communicated with me, it's just not the case. There's certainly,
surprisingly so.
It was definitely not the greatest experience of their lives, but also in context of the 20-year time span, that's also life. Those kinds of things happen. They created a brilliant Stargate product that was firing on all cylinders, but the engine that was running it ran out of gas. And that doesn't mean that, yes, it means that the product was unsuccessful because it didn't get into the hands of the gamers, but that doesn't mean that the product wasn't working. And that's the distinction that I think that we've been able to begin to make with this series of episodes on Dial the Gate. And that's what I hope to continue to do with you. And so I am thrilled that you are here with me to move through this.
Always. I absolutely love it. It's a joy for me and a privilege for me. I'm proud of what you're building here, and I'm proud to be a small part of it, right?
I'm thrilled to have you.
Smaller part, but it's so good to see these people, and I love them. Yeah, I love them, and I'm glad you and I both got to do our small part in. I mean, as we said with Dan, it didn't fail, right?
No.
And so
not from what it was. It failed from external things.
Right. And if people take nothing else out of it, it's that just because the end isn't how you envisioned it, doesn't mean that the sum of all the parts weren't the greater good. I mean, it was really excellent. So it was really good. It was really good talking to him. I'm glad he was at the forefront of the series. It's pretty great. Yep.
I'm glad you're here.
I'm glad you're here.
I'm glad I'm here.
Thank you for doing this. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I can't wait for the next one.
Absolutely. If you enjoy Stargate and you want to see more content like this on YouTube, it does make a difference if you hit the like button. It helps continue to grow the show and will continue to help us find our audience. If you have a Stargate friend out there, please consider sharing this with them, or a gamer, a friend, or someone who knew about Worlds. And if you want to get notified about future episodes, click subscribe. And giving the bell icon a click will notify you the moment a new video drops, and you'll get my notifications of any last-minute guest changes. And clips from this episode will be released over the course of the next few weeks on the Dial the Gate YouTube channel. Katie, I can't wait to see who we have next. I have no idea who it's going to be, and we'll go from there. It's going to be great. So thank you for helping me with these.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And we will see you on the other side.